And welcome to another exciting video. And today we will be continuing with our Flexbox exploration. And here we'll be trying to figure out what happens when we have a surplus or a deficit of space. We need to understand flex grow and flex shrink. To make flex grow and shrink easier to see, I'm going to give each of these children a different flex basis. So here you can see that we have the same page which we had in our previous lecture. Now in our styles, we'll be giving different flex bases. So here for these three classes, we'll have three different flex bases provided. The first one 120 pixels, the second one 40 pixels, and the third one 100 pixels. Now look, I have extra space in the Flexbox not being used by the children. So here, if I make use of the flex grow property, it will dictate how that space should be divided up by the children. By default, flex grow is set to 0, which means none of these children will grow beyond their flex basis. Now if I go ahead and I set the flex grow of the first child to 1. So here I'll say flex grow and I'll set it to 1. Save it. You'll notice that it is using up all the extra space without affecting the width of the other children. Now this one does not have a unit. It's a proportion. It's a 1 to 0. In this case 100%. It is using 100% of the extra space. If I change the flex grow on the second child, let's say 2. Now the first child is getting 1/3 of the extra space and the second child is getting 2/3. If I set the flex grow of the third child to let's say 3, now the first child gets 1/6 of the extra space, the second child gets 2/6 or 1/3, and the third child gets 3/6 or 1/2 of the extra space. Now consider the scenario that instead of dividing up the extra space, if I want to divide up the total space, I could set the flex basis on all the children to 0, which would make the total space the same as the extra space, since none of the children are taking up any space. So to do that, let's undo this flex grow setting that we had. From here, save this, and we will introduce our h1 tag basically. So here you can see these are our h1 tag. So we'll be having one class for h1 tag, and here we'll be setting the flex grow to 0 pixels. So here you can see that flex grow dictates how the extra space beyond the combined flex basis should be divided up. On the other hand, flex shrink defines what should happen when there's a deficit in the combined flex basis values, meaning if the combined flex basis is greater than the allowed space, how did these elements shrink? For example, I'm going to define all the flex basis values to be 200 pixels, and to do that I'll remove it from each of these title classes and I'll be putting it in this h1 tag. So we'll have it at one place for all the h1 tags. So we are now setting the flex basis value to 200 pixels. So the combined width will exceed the width of the container. Even though they are too big, they are all losing some width because the default width of flex shrink is set to 1. So here we are not even setting it, but if you see, we introduce this flex shrink, the default value of this is always 1. So you don't see any change when we apply this explicitly, or even if we remove it from here or comment it, you don't see any change in the output. What it means is that all children shrink the same amount from their flex basis values. Now if I set the flex shrink of one of the children to 2, so let's copy this value, and over here for title 1 we can go ahead and say flex shrink to 2. I can set it to 10 or even 100, but notice at some point it does not go past the width of the content itself if the other children have non-content width they can spare. The emphasis here is content should never be clipped for the benefit of empty space. So let's move it from here And let's go ahead and apply flex shrink on the h1 tag itself. If I don't want a child to shrink at all, I can set the flex shrink to 0. In fact, if I set the flex shrink to 0 on all of them, they will cause the container width to overflow.